And welcome to episode number 4 of the Main Card MMA podcast. As always, I am your host, Joe Murata, and I'm here to break down some of these fights coming up this weekend on UFC 240, give our predictions, and give our midweek news going around in the UFC. So let's just get right into our first fight of the main card on UFC 240. It's taking place July 27th in the Rogers Place, and that's in Edmonton, Canada. And right off the bat, we have a middleweight matchup between Marc-Andre Barriault and Krzysztof Jotko. And some cliff notes for this fight. This is Mark's second UFC fight. He debuted in a unanimous decision loss to Todd Anderson back in May on the Fight Night card with Al Iaquinta versus Cowboy Cerrone. Krzysztof, his last fight was a unanimous decision win against Alan Amedovski in April on the Overeem versus Olenek card. Prior to that fight, Krzysztof, he was on a 3-fight loss streak. That included TK loss to Brad Tavares, TK loss to Uriah Hall, and a decision loss to David Branch. Marc-Andre Barriault is 11-2 professionally, as Krzysztof Jotko is 20-4. With my decision or my picks on this fight, I'm gonna go with Krzysztof Jotko by decision, being a more experienced fighter in the UFC. Just really basing it off that, these are two not very well-known fighters, both unranked. And I'm actually kind of surprised this is on the main card for the pay-per-view. However, it seems like the first 2 or 3 fights kind of is just being carried by the main and co-main event. I definitely don't think this is the best card. I don't think this card is worth its money. I really think the UFC should implement some type of monthly fee that unlocks all pay-per-views. I think if they had a $15, $20 a month subscription like ESPN Plus, you pay the $15, $20 a month, then you could get all of the fight nights, the ESPN cards, and the pay-per-views. But that's something separate. I think that would be more fitting, so that way, your UFC fan would pay $15, $20 a month to get all pay-per-views all year. And I think that would probably net more money rather than having these $60 purchases, but people aren't buying every single one for the average fan. But that is completely something separate. And so I'm going to go with Krzysztof Jotko by decision, just looking at their past fights, experiences, just a little bit of research I did on both of these fighters. Because the first 2 fights, I didn't really know much about either fighters. I know next fight I do know a little bit about Oliver Aubin Mercier, but these first 2 fights I just had to do a little research and kind of see who they've been up against, what they're capable of, and that's what I'm going with this first fight. And then the second fight is in lightweight with Oliver Aubin Mercier. He's from Canada, so he's fighting back in home against Arman Tsarukyan. And I'm almost going to just pick Oliver just because that guy's last name was way too hard for me to say. But Oliver is coming off 2 straight losses to Gilbert Burns and Alexander Hernandez, who did just fight last week and beat Trinaldo. Arman's, this is his second UFC fight. His first was a unanimous decision loss to Islam Makhachev back in April on that Overeem Olenek card. And with this, I'm going with the more experienced fighter again, fighting at home in Canada. He likes to grapple and wrestle a lot, so we're going to go with Oliver by submission win. Looks like he just seems like all his submission wins are rear naked chokes, so that's going to be who we're going to go with that fight. Those first 2 fights definitely seem like some prelims fights that snuck their way onto the main card, but, it's what the UFC has. That's what fighters are available. Training camps and injuries and matchups lining up. Sometimes you get matchups like this. This welterweight fight I think that is pretty good is Jeff Neal versus Nico Price. Jeff Neal being 11-2, Nico Price 13-2. Jeff Neal is the winner of 3 straight since he won his contract on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series when he got the first round TKO. His last fight was the unanimous decision he had against Bilal Muhammad, and that was on the first fight of 2019 on the ESPN Plus card with TJ Dillashaw versus Henry Cejudo. Nico Price's last fight was when he KO'd Tim Means in March on the Derek Lewis versus JDS fight. With this fight, we're going to go with the prediction of Nico Price by knockout. This is a coin flip for me. I was leaning to just say Jeff Neal the whole time, and then as I was kind of doing my research and making my notes about all these fights, last second I just kind of changed it to Nico Price just because I think he might be able to get it done. I think he is a slightly taller man. But that leads us to the 2 most important fights of the main card, because it's co-main and main event. And that is the women's featherweight division. We have Chris Cyborg versus Felicia Spencer. Chris Cyborg is 20-2 with 1 no contest. Felicia Spencer 7-0. So a world of difference in terms of experience and their professional career. Both Spencer and Cyborg were former Invicta champions, and Cyborg obviously holding the UFC belt in featherweight. So this is Cyborg's first fight since that first round finish Amanda Nunes got on her in December on the John Jones-Alexander Gustafsson card. Spencer's last fight was in May on the Rafael dos Anjos versus Kevin Lee fight, when she got that first round submission against Megan Anderson. And before going back to Cyborg, before that loss to Amanda Nunes, she was on a 20-fight win streak, which I didn't know. I know she was 20-2, but I think her first professional fight she lost, and she lost her last one. And in between those 2 losses were 20 straight wins, with obviously finishes over Holly Holmes and Tanya Evinger. So for this, I'm just going to go with Cyborg. I think Cyborg by KO. I don't know if Felicia's faced someone with that type of power that Chris Cyborg has. I know Felicia Spencer is a very good grappler. She likes to take the fight to the ground, but I just don't know if Felicia will even be able to get in range to get that fight to the ground. However, with Cyborg being finished by Nunes so quickly in the last fight, it'd be interesting to see how she reacts to getting knocked out like that. If she could just bounce back, or if she is just now shy at pulling the trigger and doesn't really have that same aggression we've seen and got to know from Cyborg over the last few years in the UFC. But I think Cyborg is going to still come out and deliver that power that she always has, until she proves me otherwise, that she is not the same fighter anymore. So we got Cyborg by KO. And then our main event, we got the featherweight championship against Max Holloway against number 4 ranked Frankie Edgar. Max Holloway 20-4 as a professional. Frankie Edgar 23-6-1. Holloway's last fight was the fight I attended in Atlanta, UFC 236 in April, and that was in Atlanta, Georgia, when he lost to Dustin Poirier, when he went up to 155 to fight for the interim belt, in that decision loss. Before that, he was a winner of 13 in a row down in his division where he fights in featherweight. In that win streak, he had some wins against Brian Ortega, Jose Aldo, back-to-back fights, won both of them. Anthony Pettis, Ricardo Lamas, Jeremy Stevens. Edgar, he won his last fight against Cub Swanson back in the spring of 2018. I think that was in April. And that was a month after he got KO'd in the first round by Ortega. So a quick turnaround for him, a short camp, probably short notice fight. And he still gets the win over Cub Swanson. And that was his last fight, actually. Frankie Edgar was April of 2018. So he's been on a layoff for 15 months now. So don't know how the ring rust will factor into him. He is older. He's 37 years old. Hasn't fought in a while. I know he's a professional. He's been in fighting for a long time. And I'm sure he knows how to, make that problem as little impact as it can be. But I think Max Holloway is just truly the best featherweight of all time in the UFC, and I think he's just going to show that his pacing and his control of the octagon, with just always putting the foot on the gas, always keeping the opponent moving backwards, always throwing the jabs, hooks, kicks. I know Frankie Edgar really wants to get this fight to the ground, but just like in the Cyborg Spencer fight, I don't think he's going to be able to really keep this fight where he wants it to be. I mean, I'm sure he'll get maybe a few takedowns on Holloway. I don't think it will turn into much. I think Max Holloway is just going to keep that pressure on him. His last fight at featherweight against Ortega wanted to do the same thing and take him to the ground, and the fight never got there. Max Holloway's pressure and just jabs and just all the punches he just throws. I think he lands 7 punches a minute or something. Like in the UFC, which I think is like the highest rate of active fighters or something right now. And Max Holloway also being 4 inches taller and 10 years younger than Frankie Edgar. So I just don't think this is the fight for Frankie. I think the true test for Max Holloway is going to be the Alexander Volkanovski fight, which he is ranked 1, so it could be set up for if Max Holloway does win this. I think Volkanovski is just incredible. I think he might be the one fighter that has that aggression to match Max Holloway, but that fight's not even out yet, and I just think that's what's setting up. But I mean, the featherweight division is really emerging with some really good fighters, with Volkanovski, Ortega, Aldo's making a resurgence in his career late, Zabit, Korean Zombie, Yair Rodriguez, Jeremy Stevens. So that featherweight division's pretty interesting. It'd be pretty interesting too also, because I know Cejudo really wants to go be a 3-time champion, but I just think he'd just be completely outsized against a Max Holloway. So let's not give that thought any entertainment, because I don't think that will ever happen. Yeah, so that's our predictions for UFC 240 on the main card. Let's run it down one more time. I got Krzysztof Jotko by win by decision. Oliver Aubin Mercer versus win by submission. Nico Price by KO. Cyborg by KO. And Holloway by TKO. And that's going to be our predictions for UFC 240. We'll see how right or wrong we were come Saturday night. And last week, our predictions, we went 5 for 6. So let's see if we can keep it going and maybe get 4 out of 5 here or 5 out of 5 and make it look like we seem like we know what we're talking about. But you never know. You could be the biggest UFC fan or reporter and know all the ins and outs, and you just don't know what's going to happen once that octagon door cage closes. But yeah, so we got that for our predictions. So let's get into just the midweek UFC news. There are some pretty big headline stories out there. Again, about, you guessed it, Jon Jones. So let's just get into that, and then we'll wrap up the podcast. So Jon Jones was reportedly charged with battery after an altercation with a waitress in a strip club in April. And Jon Jones, apparently, him and his team is saying that there's nothing really behind it, that this is just all he say, she say, that there's just false claims. I did see on TMZ today that I guess there was reports that in the police report that the waitress that accused Jon Jones of touching her inappropriately and hitting her was saying to Jon Jones multiple times that if you're going to touch me like that, you have to give me $100. So that's not a very good look when you're a person accusing someone of sexual misconduct or assault or battery or whatever it may be, is already talking about exploiting him for money. And we'll see where this goes. I mean, I'm a huge Jon Jones fan. I said it in the past. He's my favorite fighter. I think he's the best of all time. But, I mean, man, as a fan of Jon Jones, it's so hard to see him always just like in the media messing up. Whether it's true or not true, it doesn't deny the fact that he's involved in these reports. and allegations and just situations that a lot of fighters aren't in. And I know he's turned to this whole religious thing and God's testing me and stuff, but I mean, he really needs to figure his stuff out. He always says that he's going to, but what are you doing at a strip club? You already know your past, what the media, what everyone thinks about you, even the court system with the hit and run, the cocaine, the picogram stuff with DC. I mean, it's, you figure with someone with that big of a target on their back would just get it together. You got so much talent, and I would hate to see him get suspended or put away in jail for some time, and then just have this distraction take away from his career, because he, in my eyes, is already the best ever. But, if he goes down and keeps winning in this light heavyweight division, and then even makes a late push into heavyweight and knocks out, people like DC or Stipe, Francis Ngannou, people up in that division, I mean, there might be no question that he's the best of all time. And I just would hate to see him go down that road. And but yeah, we'll see where this goes. I mean, if he's proven guilty and stuff, then I have no defense for him. I don't want to be a homer, but going into it, you got to take people's words for it. Our country is supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, and then in today's society, we are just all about, the first headline or allegation, and the whole world has figured you as guilty. And he hasn't had due process yet, so we'll see where that leads to. On a different note, more related to fighting and not outside incidents, there's reports of Ben Askren and Damian Maia fight being made in the works. And that will be very interesting, because Ben Askren will finally be going against another submission specialist grappler legend, just like Askren is, opposed to having his first two UFC fights be against Robbie Lawler and Jorge Masvidal, who are looking to knock your head off, and that is not his style. I don't know how far into the talks they are. I just saw the report on, I think, bloodyelbow.com, which is a UFC news website. And that should be a good one. I'd like to see when that would take place, of how much time Ben Askren is looking to take off from that knee he took. And Damian Maia, he's getting up there in age as well, but that should be a good one regardless. If it does go through, I hope it does. I don't want to see Ben Askren ever go through that knee again. I'm not a huge Ben Askren fan. I like him. I also liked Jorge Masvidal, but even if there's a fighter you just can't stand and you hate, I mean, you don't want to see someone take a knee or even an injury like that Ben Askren did. Regardless of your opinions of Ben Askren going into that fight, I mean, you got to be scared for someone when they get curl up like that after taking a knee, especially so quickly. Also, some rumors of fights is Chris Weidman is expected to be fighting Dominic Reyes for UFC in Boston, and that should be in October later on this year. Weidman will be making his light heavyweight debut, and Reyes being a young, up-and-coming fighter in the light heavyweight division, which a lot of people have him as a future challenger for that light heavyweight belt, especially since John Jones, he's beating everyone up there. So, you're going to keep throwing bodies at him until someone beats John. And Dominic Reyes could be, 1 or 2 fights away from actually challenging John Jones for that belt. Weidman making a push into 205. I don't know if that's due to just not really being able to cut down to 185 anymore, or if he just kind of feels like that division is now going away from him, with Whitaker running it, with Adesanya on the rise. I mean, Kevin Gaslam's still there, so maybe he just feels like, use Paulo Costa. Yeah, so I mean, the division might just be too stacked for him now. So even Yoel Romero. So it'll be interesting to see what Weidman does. If it goes anything like his buddy Luke Rockhold, when he just made his debut at 205 and he got his jaw broken, or was that his cheek? He broke something in his face when he got KO'd in that first round. So hopefully for Weidman's sake, it doesn't go that way, being a former champion and a UFC legend. bringing us the Anderson Silva fight one when he KO'd him. One of the most memorable highlight clips of just in the UFC. Whether or not it was just because Anderson had his hands down because he was messing around. Still a iconic clip. And so moving along, we got UFC 243 confirmed, the Adesanya versus Whitaker, which was already confirmed as a fight, but there was no venue that was guaranteed. And I think they just confirmed it's in Melbourne at the Melbourne Marvel Stadium, which holds, I think, upwards of 60,000 people. So I mean, that's like a full-on like football stadium. It's not even like a little basketball arena type stadiums or arenas where the fights usually are. And I think I even saw that they were talking about maybe having that fight in Vegas for a little bit, but I think with just Adesanya coming out of New Zealand and Whitaker from Australia, I think that fight just had to be in Australia. It'd be too big of an event to not have over there, and that is going to be a great one. I just hope Whitaker can make the fight, no injuries, last-second hernias, or anything like that. I know Adesanya will show up. I'd be interested if Adesanya had some type of deal with Dana White that if Whitaker doesn't show for this fight, they strip him and give him the belt. Just because of what happened earlier with the Gaslam fight, and I really do think the UFC wants Adesanya to win. I mean, he's just got a superstar written all over him, so... And he's way more active, too. UFC likes active fighters. Dana White loves when his fighters fight and likes when his champions defend their belts. That's also why I don't think he was too big on Tyron Woodley when I mentioned last podcast with Dana White. Speaking of Dana White, apparently he thinks Cyborg, whether she wins or loses this next fight, that she won't fight Nunes because she was afraid to lose again. Which I don't know if he's saying that to like do some reverse psychology, or if he truly thinks Cyborg doesn't want to, go for that belt again and is just cool with fighting out her contract, getting paid, and just not taking that fight again. But I would think, as a fan, I would think Cyborg would want to fight Nunes again and revenge that loss. I know Cyborg wasn't thrilled on the idea of fighting Amanda just because it's a Brazilian versus Brazilian, and Brazilians are very loyal and just to their country and their heritage. But we'll see what happens, She can knock out Felicia Spencer, then immediately call out Amanda and say, hey, come up to 145 or I'll come down to 135. And we'll see. But I personally would love to see them fight again. I don't know who would win. I know Nunes finished her quickly, but when they were exchanging those punches, I mean, Nunes was also, one punch from being finished herself. Just with that power Cyborg has and how close everything was to landing. And then the last little thing from the UFC I saw was Dan Hooker, the winner of the fight last week with the RDA Leon Edwards card. He is wanting to fight Al Iaquinta in that same UFC in Boston. UFC 243, is that? No, that's not UFC 243. I see that Dan Hooker wants to fight Al Iaquinta in the UFC card in Boston. And, he's ranked now. He knocked out James Vick in the first round. Al Iaquinta is right there in the middle of the division, so it makes sense. You always want to shoot up. You don't want to start calling people unranked or ranked way below you. And I'd be interested to see how that goes. And the way Dan Hooker finished James Vick is... made me a big believer in Dan Hooker. But I already started kind of pulling for him after seeing him just endure that fight from Edson Barboza where he was just being kicked to shreds. And just seeing him just be so tough and just stand in there for as long as possible made me a fan of him. But so that's it. So that's our recap. That's not our recap. That's our predictions for UFC 240. For the main card, and it's just some UFC news, some talking points. As always, guys, though, I do appreciate anyone that does take the time to listen to my podcast, liking the video, subscribing to me on YouTube, leaving any comments. Please feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you think about these upcoming fights. Let me know what you think about any of these news reports with John Jones. Do you think he's innocent, guilty? If any of these fights with Askren Maya or Dominic Reyes, Weidman, if any of these things gets you interested or any matchups you would like to see. or just pertaining to my podcast of if there's anything I should do differently. Should I change, looking to getting a new logo, setting it up different, making it longer, maybe trying to do different pictures or videos? Should I have a webcam for myself? Like, just any feedback about this, because this is only episode 4, so we're in the infant stage of this podcast, and any feedback, good or positive, good or negative, sorry, I would like to get, and I'll definitely take it to heart and see what I could do to make this better for anyone that listens. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you guys Sunday to see what happened on UFC 240.